What is up guys, Blue Spooky here with another daily video. If you guys are enjoying these daily videos, especially these longer hour-and-a-half ones, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. Doing any of those, let alone all of them, really helps the channel to do well and the videos to do well, and ensures I can continue making these for a long time to come. If you guys are curious about all the censored words lately, I've been receiving a lot of strikes for inappropriate language, quote unquote. So I've been trying to censor out anything that might get me flagged. If you guys would like to support the channel even further, because these videos all getting flagged as soon as they're posted does really affect the channel, you can go ahead and click that join button below the subscribe button. The lowest tier is $2 a month, and you get special emoticons to comment with, and a special icon appears next to your name when you make a comment. It's of course completely optional, and no content will ever be hidden behind a paywall. It's simply an extra way for you to support the channel if you'd like to. Without further ado though guys, I will get right into the next hour and 30 minutes of true scary stories, and I hope you guys enjoy them and have a great day. I work at a small retail store, and it shouldn't be any surprise to hear that I hate it there. The work, the customers, even some of the co-workers as well. But hey, it was my first job and really the only one I was able to get with no experience. Over winter break, my school was out for 3 weeks, which meant I wasn't forced to only work closing shifts like usual. I talked to my manager, who said I could take up a few overnight shifts if I wanted. I gladly accepted, knowing at least I wouldn't have to deal with customers and could mostly work at my own pace. I knew the overnight manager, Chris, and when I came in for my first overnight, he showed me what to do and left me on my own to do it. I appreciated this. It was just the two of us working on opposite ends of the store. Being overnight, it was really nice, quiet, peaceful, getting to work in complete solace, and even listening to music as I did so. It only took a couple of hours for the fun to wear off though, and I was actually getting really bored, maybe even a little sleepy as well. Not talking to a single person in many hours was more than I'd bargained for. It was just past 1 a.m., so I let Chris know I was going to take my 15. I grabbed my lunch from the fridge in the break room and left the building. I sat in my car and scarfed down my food, hoping to store up 10 minutes for a quick nap. Before I got the chance to rest my eyes, though, I noticed someone standing next to the building. The entire parking lot was empty and completely dark, with only the lights from inside the retail store shining through. There was no reason for anyone to be here. This guy was looking into the windows like he was trying to see inside. Very odd and suspicious behavior. I felt like I'd better stay awake and watch what this guy was doing. He looked like a pretty tall dude, with short hair and wearing a dark leather jacket, maybe some old boots on as well. I watched him for the rest of my break, an entire 10 minutes. The guy was just standing outside watching through the windows of our store. Having to clock back in now, I got out and started walking toward the front doors. I was walking fast, hoping to slip by this guy without giving him a chance to stop me. Before I even got halfway through the parking lot though, he spun around and looked right at me. His eyes were dead and bloodshot, and his face was blank and devoid of emotion. I kept walking, trying to make it to the door. The man immediately started moving over to me. He was maybe 10 feet away as I came up and started unlocking the door. He said something to me as I hurried inside and locked it behind me. I just ignored him out of a gut feeling that he was up to no good. Maybe that was harsh of me to not even see what he wanted, but at the time I just had a really bad feeling about this guy. I made my way to the back to use the bathroom, and then went back on to the sales floor. A few minutes later, I wanted to get back to work, but I felt tempted to check out the front windows and see what that man was up to. I walked up to the front, fully expecting to see his creepy eyes staring through the window, but he wasn't there, not even anywhere in the parking lot. I figured that meant he must have left for good. I went back to the aisle I was working in. Another few minutes went by, and it was probably 1:30 or so. Suddenly, the alarm began to sound through the entire building. I knew exactly what that was right away. It was the back door that was in the storage area of the building. Sometimes, the managers would toss stuff in the dumpster out back and accidentally trip the alarm, but with only Chris working besides me, it seemed fairly unlikely. I started making my way to the back of the store, but the closer I got to the doors to the storage room, the more this bad feeling crept up inside of me. If it was Chris, surely he would have shut off the alarm by now. I got to the back area, and just before I entered, I heard a bunch of thuds coming from the other side. I quickly pushed open the door, and the sound stopped immediately. Down the hallway, I could see the back door was wide open, and there was no sign of Chris anywhere. "Chris?" I called out. He didn't respond. Instead, a moment later, a head peered around the corner on the other end of the hallway. I recognized those dead eyes right away, and felt my whole body tense up. After hesitating, I ran right back the way I came, not stopping for anything until I got outside and into my car. I called 911. It was as I did this that I realized I had no idea where Chris was. Cops arrived quick, running into the building and searching the entire place. Thankfully, Chris was unharmed. He'd locked himself into the manager's office. The guy had broken in and attacked him by surprise. Luckily, he was able to escape his assault. He explained to me that the thud noises I'd heard was the man pounding on the office door trying to break it down. The guy ran away as soon as I did, so he was gone before the cops could get to him. We have a blurry image of his face from the security cameras printed out and hung up on the back wall so other employees can keep a lookout for him. As far as I know, he hasn't come back. There's no saying what he was trying to do that night. I'm just lucky that my gut feeling was working well. My name is John. I'm 23 and I work at a 24/7 bar in my town that's known for our pizza and drinks. We don't really have any other food options, but people seem to enjoy it either way. I've never really understood why the owners decided they wanted us to deliver pizzas. It's a lot of hassle for probably not all that much extra money, but since we didn't really get that many delivery orders anyway, I was always the only driver. My shift was usually 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. On this night, I walked into the place being pretty crowded. There were several large groups, and with deliveries being slow, I was helping out with waiting tables in the meantime. There were a few deliveries still, though. I made maybe one an hour. At 3 a.m., there was another regular delivery for me to drop off. I grabbed the single pizza and got in my car. The address was 15 minutes away, so I typed it into Google Maps and started driving. Everything up until this point was completely normal. This was just like any other delivery, and honestly, I was quite happy to get out of that crowded bar and out onto the quiet roads. While driving, though, I was caught completely off guard when my Google Maps just suddenly said I'd arrived at my destination. I wasn't even in a neighborhood, though. I pulled over on the curb and tried to figure out where I'd gone wrong. Double-checking everything, this was the address that was on the order. Only the address was for the entrance to a forest preserve or a park or something like that. There weren't even any houses nearby that it could have been mixed up with. I called the customer's number. It rang for less than a second before they picked up. "Hey, this is John. I'm just trying to deliver your pizza, but I think you've given us the wrong address." There was a strangely long pause as I could hear the man breathing into the phone. He began to describe my car and said to look to my left. I did as he said and literally saw nothing but a pitch-black forest. Then I saw something begin to move. It appeared to be the man on the phone. He was waving his arms in the air to get my attention. He was standing way off in the forest beyond the road. I don't know why he didn't just come onto the side of the road where it was easier to see, or even why he'd ordered it here to begin with. I got out and started walking over. It was hard not to notice how eerily quiet it was outside next to this forest preserve. There were no cars anywhere, and no other people either. I found it really odd, too, that as I walked up to the guy, he didn't even move to meet me halfway. He just stood there and watched me walk across the street and up to the grass. Just before the edge of the forest where he was at, I stopped halfway through the grass area, realizing that this was way too weird. I waved for him to come over and grab the pizza and pay for it. The guy hesitated, and instead of walking up to me, he looked behind me and on either side, pretty obviously looking for any bystanders. My nerves were really high at this point, which made it hard to think clearly. If my mind was clear, I definitely would have just taken off from my car and left. Before I could come to my senses, though, the man started approaching me. He was moving really fast and didn't slow down even as he got closer. I stumbled back, but it was too late. The man grabbed my upper arm and started pulling me back toward the forest. He was clearly trying to be quiet, though, not yelling or saying anything, instead putting all his efforts into trying to drag me. We struggled back and forth for several seconds before I realized I couldn't break free. I started punching wildly. It only took a few clean shots to his face before he let me go, and by then we were only a few feet from the forest. I took off running, looking only back to check if he was following. I saw him get up and run off into the forest. To my horror, 2 other guys came out from behind the trees. I got in my car and drove straight to the police station that was on the other side of the block. Obviously, the guys had completely run off by then, though. I actually went back to work after that, explaining what happened to my boss and asking if he had any info on the guy's order. All he had was a phone number, which had already been disconnected. The first name was most likely fake as well. After that, he sent me home early with a free slice of pizza. I didn't think that was exactly a fair trade, but I wasn't going to complain. If I'd been dumb enough to walk up to the forest that night, I probably would have been instantly attacked by all 3 men, with no witnesses anywhere around. Luckily, my hesitance to approach him made it an easier fight to escape, but it very quickly could have turned into something far worse. I was out camping in a familiar part of the forest near my city. My city is small and honestly has not much to do, so camping is the one thing I found that I really enjoy doing. Not such a big fan of hiking, though. I prefer the more relaxing aspects of camping, like sitting by the fire and having no responsibilities. The trail I went on was one I'd been on plenty of times. It was only a 30-ish minute walk from the parking area, and the campsite was right by a lake. Having only my small city near this forest, there's only so many people you could expect to possibly be camping at the same time and place as I was. This time when I got there was one man that had a tent already set up. I could see him down by the lake walking amongst the sand. He looked to be in his 40s and had some generic swimming trunks on and a stained white t-shirt. I walked a little farther from where his tent was and set up my own. I collected some large stones from nearby and placed them in a ring formation, prepping for the campfire I was going to have later. As I did, I noticed the man looking at me. Not just a generic glance, though. He was standing down by the lake with his full body turned completely toward me, clearly watching me. I tried to just ignore him, but every time I took a glance back, he was in that same spot, just standing still and staring at me. It was really creepy feeling, so I ended up waving at him to see if he wanted to say hi or something. After I waved at him, he instantly turned around and continued walking along the lake line. Whatever that was, I really didn't like it. It gave me an uncomfortable feeling about that guy. I decided it might be best to keep an eye on him for a while. Nothing else really happened, but after 20 minutes, he walked away from the lake and into the forest behind his tent. I thought there may have been a trail back there, or he could have just been pacing around. Whatever the case, I was glad that he was gone for now. I put my chair down by the lake and started to relax. I was down there for about an hour or so, before grabbing my things and moving back up to my tent. The sun was now setting, so I lit up my campfire and sat there and looked around at the forest. That was when I suddenly spotted something far out there. There was a shape next to one of the trees in the forest. I squinted, trying to get a clearer view. All I could make out was what appeared to be a white shirt. It was that guy again, standing far behind my campsite and staring at me from behind a tree. Now this was getting really creepy. How long he had been watching for, I had no idea. I moved my chair to the other side of the campfire, so I was now facing him. I didn't want to lose sight of him. He stayed there for a good 40 minutes, watching me from behind the trees in the forest. It started to get real dark out, and shadows were everywhere, making it hard to see him anymore. After a while, it was so dark I couldn't even make out his shape any longer. I could only look in the general direction that he had been in. With my campfire lighting up the area around me, though, I knew he could still see me quite clearly. Knowing that he was still out there somewhere, just staring at me, and yet not being able to see what he was doing, made me really anxious. I mean, what the hell was this guy's problem? He even had a tent set up like he was camping, but in the hours I'd been there, I'd never once seen him go to it. With everything getting to my head now, I debated just packing up and leaving. At this point, I was worried the guy would follow me out, though, so I just sat there and tended to the fire, making sure it did not go out. I waited as several long and tiring hours passed by. I didn't see anything. I did look at his tent every now and then, but I never saw him come back to it, or come close enough for me to see him again. When the sun started coming up, I looked all around and saw no signs of the man. I packed up my gear and booked it back to my car. It's hard to know what that man's intentions were. If I hadn't stayed awake and been cautious of him from the start, who knows where I'd be right now? "20 years ago, I was living in New Jersey. I worked as a pizza delivery driver and worked at this neighborhood joint called Domino. The shop was at this corner on the edge of town. The area would be pretty busy during the day, but not so much at night. Obviously, we were open pretty late, what with it being a pizza shop and all. One time, I remember I was working until 2 a.m., At about 1 o'clock in the morning, there was a delivery for me to make. I was sitting inside the shop and left out the back door to go to my car. I parked in the small lot behind the place, which was where all the employees would park. I walked out the back door, and as soon as I did, I saw this suspicious guy standing near my car outside. He started moving away instantly, and I asked the man what he was doing. The guy quickly ducked behind a couple of dumpsters that were back there. He had gone out of my line of sight just as quickly as I had seen him. I figured he had left the property and ducked into the alley behind the dumpsters. All I knew for sure was that I couldn't see him anymore. I went over to my car and didn't really notice anything out of place. I got inside with the pizza and then left to make the delivery. I was able to do so without much a problem at all. After getting back from the delivery, I went back inside. A while later, I got my next delivery to be made. I went through the back door again, and this time when I left, I did not see anybody by my vehicle. As I was walking towards it about halfway there, I suddenly heard footsteps from behind me. I looked back and noticed the same man from before was now moving in my direction. I went faster and jumped inside my car with the pizza in tow. The guy kept moving towards my car, at one point breaking out into a sprint. I thought he was either going to try and get in somehow or talk to me. The way he had been at my car earlier made him very suspicious already. He got within just a couple of feet, but did not try to open the door or knock on my window or anything. He just kind of stood there looking at me. I didn't wait around to see what he wanted though. I started up my engine and quickly left the area. I went out and made the next delivery. I was gone for about 15 minutes or so. I went back to work and parked in my usual spot. After getting out of my car, I was starting to walk back to the back door. That was when I noticed the man was still there, coming out from behind the nearby vehicle of a coworker of mine. He now was standing right next to the back door of the place. I didn't know what he wanted. I decided to just walk away instead of going to the back door like I usually did. I went around the edge of the parking lot and walked to the front door, which was locked by now. I rang the bell and a coworker saw me and unlocked the door. I went inside and told them about this sketchy guy blocking the back doorway. We ended up calling the police to report him, and nobody left the store until they arrived and checked out the area. The man was gone by then. I guess they couldn't find him after. After a while, they left and I got another delivery that night. I didn't see him at all for the rest of it though. That was surely the creepiest thing that ever happened to me when I worked there. This happened back in the year 1996. I was 13, and one night I was at home with my older sister, who was 16 at the time. I remember that our parents were gone for the night, so they gave us some money to order a pizza. After our parents left, I went into my room to play some video games. My sister was in her bedroom. When I got hungry, I left my room and told my sister that I really wanted some pizza. We ordered, and I'm not sure exactly what time it was. All I know is that it was dark out. While we waited for the pizza, we hung out together in the living room. I remember that the pizza guy got there. After he rang the doorbell, my sister went over and answered. She paid the pizza guy and brought the pizza into the kitchen. I was still in the living room watching TV, but I was about to go into the kitchen. As I got up, I heard somebody suddenly trying to open the front door to our home. I stopped where I was and listened in. They tried opening the door again. I wasn't sure if it was the pizza guy or what. I went over to the front window and looked out of it. I was just on time to barely see somebody moving away. They went out of sight within just a second though, and I didn't really get a good look at them. It was just enough to know that there was somebody out there, and that person had gone to the side toward the driveway. It also led toward the side of our house though. I kept watching, but I didn't see the person return. I figured they must have left. I went into the kitchen, and I told my sister about that strange occurrence. We looked out of all the windows, but we didn't see anything suspicious. We figured the guy must have left. We went into the living room and were having the pizza and watching some TV. Not long into this, though, There was a loud knock at the front door. We carefully went over to a front window and looked outside of it. When we did, we saw there was a man standing there out front, on the front step. It was not the pizza delivery guy from earlier, though. Neither of us recognized the man. We figured it must have been the same guy who had just tried entering the house earlier. We didn't know what we should do. I wanted to call our parents, but they didn't have cell phones at the time. We stayed in the living room and heard the man knock once more. He stopped and things were very quiet for a short time. We looked out again and the guy seemed to be gone. I couldn't find him anywhere. Just moments later, we heard somebody trying to open the back door to the house. Whoever this guy was, he seemed very determined to get into our home for whatever reason. My sister said she was calling the police and went over to the home phone. I stayed put in the living room and hoped the man would not try to break in while my sister was on the phone with the police. I didn't hear anything more. After she was told the police were on their way, we looked out of a few more windows. We couldn't find the guy in the backyard or the front yard. 10 minutes later, the police got there. We figured that the guy must have left. I remember just hoping that he wouldn't return after the police had gone away. My sister talked to the police and told them what happened. I also talked to them a little bit too, and gave my account of the events. They said they would take a full look around our property. Surprisingly, the police actually did find the man, hiding behind a tree in our backyard. The very same guy. I really couldn't believe that he was still there. The police arrested the man for trespassing. Neither me nor my sister had any idea who he was. I'm just really glad they actually found him. I'm a former pizza delivery driver. I got the job when I was 20 years old, and at first I really liked it a lot. I would not have to work that much, just a few nights a week. My car was fairly new and I didn't mind delivering at all. The area I live in is not super crowded, so the driving is pretty easy on the roads. I would also make lots of money in tips, so it was well worth it. After I had been working there for about 6 months, I was working one weekend pretty late. It had been a pretty busy night. I remember going on countless deliveries and making quite a bit of money as well. It got later and the delivery slowed down significantly. I was sitting inside of the restaurant when we got another order for me to deliver. By now, it was probably around 1 something in the morning. It was just an order of cheese bread. I took the order, got the address, and headed out to my car to deliver it. I had been to this area before, but not the exact street or address. The location was only about 10 minutes away. When I arrived, I saw that it appeared to be a pretty typical house. It was on a residential street. I parked on the side of the road and walked up to the home with cheesy bread in hand. When I got to the front door, though, I noticed there was a note taped to it. It said, "Please use back door." When I saw this, I'm not going to lie, I immediately got a bad feeling about it. I knew there must be a logical explanation, though. Maybe the door didn't work, or there was too much junk in front of it or something. The reason for my bad feeling was probably just because it was so late at night and really dark out. I walked around the side of the house and went into the back area. I looked around for the back door and was able to find it. I walked up to the back door and knocked on it, then waited for about 30 seconds or so. There was no response. I was just about to knock again when I thought I could hear some footsteps inside. I waited and the door opened up, but I didn't see anybody. It was like whoever opened up the door had stayed behind it and moved out of the way quickly. Inside of the home, it was completely dark. Not a single light was on. I was very confused. I didn't go inside. I just kept standing there and announced I was from the pizza place. I didn't get a response at all. As I waited there by the open door, I wondered what I should do. The bread was not paid for, so I couldn't just leave. As I continued waiting, a short time later, I thought I heard the sound of the front door to the home opening and closing. I couldn't be sure, though. I asked if anybody was there. I knew that somebody had opened the door for me and seemingly wanted me to go inside. I certainly was not going to do that. I just kept standing there when I noticed some movement to my right and sort of behind me. I looked, and there was a man standing at the entrance of the backyard on the side of the home. This man was wearing a ski mask over his face. I was really creeped out. As soon as I saw him, he started to walk toward me. When that happened, I knew I had to get out of there. I set the box of bread down and took off running. I went back around the house away from the guy and ran to my car. I got inside and drove away. From there, I went back to work and told my coworkers all about it. They all found it very amusing and seemed to think it was funny. I was completely terrified, though. So much so that I only worked there for about 1 more month. Then I quit. I got another job after. I still think about that from time to time. Was it some crazy prank or did the man have sinister intentions? I really don't know for sure. I was traveling alone for a business conference, and the budget didn't quite stretch to high-end hotels. I found a small, inexpensive one online, situated on the edge of a town. It looked decent enough in the photos, though they were clearly outdated. The reviews were very mixed. Some people had good experiences, and others complained about odd noises and strange happenings. I shrugged it off as an exaggeration. I was only going to be there a couple of nights anyway, so I figured I wouldn't really have any problems. The check-in process when I got there was very uneventful. The clerk was an elderly man who didn't say much, beyond handing me the key to my room. I headed to my room, which was at the end of a long and narrow hallway. The carpet was worn and the walls had patches where the paint was peeling. This hotel was definitely older than the pictures online showed, and needed some serious renovations. I went about my usual routine of unpacking, setting up my laptop, and getting some work done. At around 10 p.m., I decided I needed to get some rest. The bed was very uncomfortable, but I still managed to fall asleep fairly quickly. I was woken up in the middle of the night, though, to a loud banging noise coming from the room next door. It was relentless, like someone was hitting the wall or furniture repeatedly. I thought about calling the front desk, but decided against it. I was very tired. I just hoped that whatever this was would stop soon. The banging persisted, though. It was somewhat unnerving, but I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep. Just when I'd started to drift off again, I heard something that made me shoot up in bed. There was a faint whispering coming from the hallway. It was quite soft, but distinct enough to make out the words, "Somebody, help me, please!" I told myself it was probably just someone talking loudly outside, maybe even another guest who was drunk or having an argument. I got up to check the hallway and peered through the peephole, but saw nothing unusual. The corridor was completely empty and quiet, except for a distant hum of what I assume was the old heating system. I returned to bed, feeling somewhat uneasy about what I'd just heard. I tried to just shake it off. I closed my eyes and finally fell asleep. The next morning, though, I noticed the door to my room was slightly open. I was sure that I'd closed it properly before going to sleep. I brushed it off as me being forgetful. When I went downstairs for breakfast, I asked the elderly clerk at the desk if he had any idea about the noises from the previous night. He just gave me a non-committal nod and said he didn't know. I spent the day at the conference trying to forget about that night's disturbances. By the evening, I was back at the hotel and quite exhausted. I hoped for a quiet night, but when I entered my room, I noticed something quite odd. My laptop, which had been on the desk when I left, was now on the bed instead. I hadn't touched it after finishing my work that night. I was more cautious this time and made sure everything was secure. I tried to get some sleep. At around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by a loud crashing sound. It sounded like something heavy had fallen over in the room next door. I didn't want to deal with the banging and ominous whispering again, so I tried to stay calm. I could hear faint footsteps moving around in the corridor, but I didn't want to investigate myself. Then I heard a soft scratching sound coming from the closet area. I was too scared to get up, so I laid in bed wide awake, listening to the scratching growing louder and more frantic. It felt like something or someone was trying to get out. I couldn't take it anymore. I got out of bed, turned on the light, and opened the closet. There was nothing inside but a few old hangers and some extra blankets as well. The next morning, I packed up quickly, relieved to be done with that place. As I checked out, I asked the clerk if there had been any recent issues with the rooms. He looked at me with a somber expression and said that sometimes guests reported strange experiences. He didn't offer any further explanation. I did some research later and found out the hotel had a history of being associated with shady accidents and unexplained events. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night. I'm just glad I don't have to stay there ever again. I used to work the night shift at a small hotel by the highway. It's usually quiet after midnight, just a few late arrivals and the occasional call. This one night was different though. It started with a phone call at about 1 a.m. The voice on the phone said that they needed a room. I checked the reservation system, but we were fully booked for the night already. I responded by saying that we didn't have any vacancies for the night and asked if they had a reservation. The voice didn't answer right away. All they responded with was that they needed a room, and it was very important. Without a reservation, I couldn't give them a room though. I did inform them of some nearby hotels available for the night. I then hung up. About an hour later, a man walked in. I greeted him, and he handed me a crumpled piece of paper. It had a room number scratched onto the paper, saying room 217. There was a note attached saying, "I need this room. No one else should know." I looked at the man, feeling a bit uneasy. I responded by saying that I was sorry, but room 217 was not available right now. The man didn't say anything. He just pulled out a stack of cash and slammed it on the counter, nodding to me as if to take it as a bribe. I was getting more uncomfortable, but boldly stated that I could not help him without an ID or reservation, and asked him to leave if he didn't have either of those. He looked at me for a long moment, then turned and walked out. I felt a shiver as the door closed behind him. I decided to check the security monitors. Everything seemed normal as far as I could tell. At 3 a.m. though, I heard a loud bang from upstairs. I grabbed the master key card and went to investigate. When I reached the second floor, I noticed the door to room 217 was slightly ajar. My heart started racing. I pushed the door open a bit more and peered inside. The room was dark, but I saw enough to know that something was wrong. The bed was messed up, and there was a handkerchief on the floor, stained with something dark. I backed away and saw movement at the end of the hallway. I turned to see the man from earlier standing there. I didn't wait any longer or try to confront him. Instead, I ran back downstairs and called the police. When they arrived, the man was already gone. They checked the hotel security footage, but the video from that time was corrupted. They didn't find anything else in room 217 except the handkerchief. I never found out what happened. The police couldn't explain it either. I was left feeling uneasy. I ended up moving on from working at that hotel a couple of months later and was glad to be able to put that out of my mind. One October night many years ago when we were both young adults, my friend Mike and I were driving back after a very fun road trip. We ended up checking into a hotel later in the evening, as we weren't going to make it all the way home and didn't want to drive throughout the whole night. Mike and I decided to unwind in the hot tub at the hotel because there wasn't anything to do in the small town we were staying in. We had been on the road pretty much all day, and the warmth of the hot tub was exactly what we needed. After checking in at the front door desk, we changed into our swimsuits and headed down to the outdoor pool area. The pool itself was closed for maintenance. I think some sort of chemical treatment, maybe. The hot tub was open, though. The night was clear and the stars were visible, but the area around the hot tub was poorly lit, casting long shadows over everything. Mike and I settled into the tub for a nice relax. We needed to unwind before bed. We talked about our day, our plans for the next day, and just caught up on life, really. After a while, the conversation drifted to more trivial things. Things such as our old high school days, funny incidents, and random stuff such as this. As we talked, we noticed a figure at the edge of the pool area. At first, we thought it was someone from another room, also coming out for a late-night dip. As the time passed by, though, the figure made no attempt to move. It was just a man standing there and looking at us. I whispered to Mike, asking if he saw this weird stuff going on. I motioned toward the guy near the edge of the pool. Mike squinted through the dim lighting and responded that he could indeed see him. He asked me what he was doing, but I couldn't make out much. The figure was tall and wearing dark clothing. I could see the silhouette clearly, but the man's face was obscured by the darkness. I wasn't sure if the figure was just deciding on whether they wanted to swim in the pool even though it was closed or something else. We continued our conversation, trying to ignore the mysterious stranger, but it was hard not to feel uneasy. The man didn't move at all. He just stood there as though he was waiting for something. Finally, Mike decided to call out and asked the man what he was waiting for. He told him the pool was closed and there was no reason to stand around there. There was no response from the man. He didn't even flinch. His presence was making everything feel tense. Mike glanced at me, indicating that maybe we should go inside for the night. I nodded in agreement and we started to get out of the hot tub. Just then, the man turned and walked away. He moved very deliberately slow. It was so odd. He didn't appear to be in any hurry at all. We watched him disappear into the dark and didn't speak until he was out of sight. We went to our room and locked the door behind us, making sure the chain was secure. We joked about it, of course, trying to laugh off the strange encounter, but neither of us could shake this feeling of unease lingering over us. We turned off the lights and went to bed, but neither of us could sleep very well. In the morning, we were eager to leave. We packed up our things, and after turning in our keys at the front desk, we were on our way. A few days later, Mike showed me an article in the paper. A man had apparently been found dead in that area near the hotel. It was ruled an accident, but the details were chilling. He had been living in the woods nearby and frequently came to the hot tub of the hotel. His body was found floating in the pool that was closed off for maintenance. We never saw the face of the man who was at the pool with us that night, so we couldn't determine if it was the same guy who was pictured in the paper. Regardless, though, the man who was watching us that night by the pool had either been killed or killed someone, or perhaps was something else entirely. One time, I was driving down a road late at night. It was a quiet road with no other vehicles in sight. I was on my way home, and I remember that I randomly saw this woman just standing on the side of the road up ahead. It wasn't like in front of a driveway or anything, and she appeared very much out of place. As I approached, I slowed down because she was standing within just a few feet of the lane that I was driving in. When I got closer, she actually started to walk out into the street and waved at me. It was not a frantic wave or anything, but she clearly wanted me to stop. I slowed down and came to a stop just in front of her. She walked over to my driver's window, and I rolled it down a bit. I asked the woman if she was all right, and she said she really needed a ride. I asked her what she was doing out here at this hour, but she kind of blew off my question. Instead, she said she needed a ride a few miles up the road and asked if I could take her there. I said yes because I didn't really have a problem with it. That was the direction I was already going in anyway. I told her to get into my passenger side. After she did, I asked her where exactly she was going. The woman just said a few miles up the road again, but refused to give an exact destination. I just thought, whatever. I started driving. We mostly drove in complete silence for the next few miles. Then, the woman told me to turn right in an upcoming road. I did and figured she must live somewhere over there. It was an even quieter road than the previous one we had been on. After driving that way, I was told to take a left at the next road. I did. The road was now surrounded by woods on both sides. I was driving very slowly down this eerie road when randomly the woman told me to stop right there. I was very confused. There were no houses or buildings anywhere in sight. It was just woods as far as the eye could see. She said she would get out there and thanked me for the ride. I asked her why she wanted me to stop there. She just said that's where she wanted to get out. I asked if there was a reason why she was getting out there, but she just opened the door. At that point, before she left my car, she asked if I could come out and help her with something real quick. I asked what, and she just told me to get out of the car. By now, I was thinking this whole thing was really sketchy. I was regretting ever giving her a ride in the first place. I told her to get out of my vehicle. The woman raised her voice and yelled at me to get out of the car. I hit the gas pedal and started driving. The woman literally began screaming at me to stop the car over and over. I did not do so. I kept driving for at least 100 yards or so, then pulled over and yelled at her to get out already. At that point, she finally did. She cursed at me several times before leaving the car and running away. I quickly drove out of there soon after. I'm pretty sure that woman was setting me up to get attacked or something. I called the police after and reported everything. I'm glad that I didn't get out of the car where she wanted, and hopefully nobody else fell for her tricks. I used to hitchhike when I was younger. This was back in the 90s, and I would hitchhike many places. I did it all over the country. It was a cheap way to travel. Looking back, it was also a pretty dangerous way to travel. I can't believe that I ever did it as much as I did. Well, I'm going to tell you the story that made me stop doing it altogether. I was going to go to California to visit some friends. I'd already made it more than halfway there, but I still had a ways to go. Somebody had just given me a ride to a city that I don't even remember exactly where it was. I spent a couple of hours there. Then I was going to try and catch another ride. I stood near a major highway, but next to a road leading to it. I waited for somebody to stop. Eventually, this white van pulled over. The man driving told me that he could take me to where I needed to go. I told him where I was going, and he said that he was also going to California. I felt extremely lucky at that point, so I got inside of his van. He told me I could sit in the back. The man had long hair, and I remember his big mustache as well. It was great to get a ride from him because there was a lot of space in the back of his van. After he started driving, we talked briefly, but not very much. Soon, though, I began to get tired. I'd been up since very early in the morning and eventually fell asleep. I don't know how long I was asleep for, but I've always been a pretty deep sleeper. Anyway, next thing I knew, I woke up. The van was stopped. I sat up and looked around. It was nighttime, and the man was no longer driving. He wasn't anywhere to be seen. I seemed to be the only person in the van. I looked out of the windows of the van to see where we were. It was parked in the driveway of a random home. When I looked at the house, standing at the front door was the man who had been driving me. I could see him talking to someone. As soon as their conversation ended, the front door opened, and several men exited the house. They all started walking in my direction. I had a terrible feeling about this immediately. I quietly went for the side door. I opened it up and jumped out, then quickly ran down to the end of the driveway and into the next yard. I went down the street until I got to a random nearby house that seemed far enough away. I walked up and knocked on the door. I'm not even sure what time it was, but I was very lucky when the door actually opened. When the person came to the doorway, I asked them to call the police for me, and thankfully they did. I explained to them what was going on, and I waited there on their front step. I did not see the men attempting to come after me or anything. However, I did see the white van driving up and down the road just a minute later. When the cops got there, everybody was already gone. I got a ride to a nearby bus stop and then used public transportation for the rest of my trip. I wasn't willing to risk it again. This happened just a few weeks ago. I was driving one morning and I was surprised to see a hitchhiker. He was standing on the side of the road, not too far away from my apartment. I remember noticing him because I really never see hitchhikers around here. Obviously, I did not stop and give him a ride. Instead, I kept going. The very next day, I found myself driving really late at night. I was in the same general area, but a different spot, when I saw that hitchhiker again. At least, I was pretty sure it was the exact same guy, although I can't fully confirm that. It's not like I'd memorized what the man had looked like the day before. Just based on the fact that I saw a similar-looking hitchhiker 2 days in a row, though, that told me it was probably the same man. Anyway, by this time the roads were extremely quiet. Hardly anyone else was out. I was less than 10 minutes away from home. When I was approaching the hitchhiker guy, he started walking out into the road. I got a bad feeling because it looked like he was going to try and force me to stop. I slowed down and went into the oncoming traffic lane, which obviously was empty, mind you. When I did, though, the man kept walking. He too went into that lane, so I basically had to completely stop my vehicle. I went back to the right, and so did the man. I stopped and rolled down the window. I said that I could not give the man a ride. He started to say something, but I turned my wheel to the left and started to slowly drive around him. He did not run out in front of my car again, but he did make a half-hearted attempt to walk in that direction. Thankfully, I was able to safely get around him. I started to continue down the road, feeling like I'd possibly avoided a bad situation. That was when I noticed headlights in my mirror, seemingly out of nowhere. There was another car in the road. I saw the hitchhiker guy walking out into the road again. I noticed this car was stopping for him, and I was able to just see him get inside the vehicle before they basically went out of my sight. I guess that whoever was behind me had decided to stop and give the guy a ride. I kept going, but the car behind me soon caught up with me and started basically riding right on my tail. This was kind of strange. When I had to turn at an upcoming street, I did so, and the car behind me did as well. After continuing to follow me very closely, I wondered why they were doing this. It kept going for the rest of my drive home. It was very blatantly obvious they were following me, and I clearly could not just go back to my apartment. It was at that moment when I remembered I should drive to the police station, so I did exactly that. It took me almost 10 minutes to go to the nearest police station. The car behind me followed the entire way, right up until the end. Then it went someplace else. I ended up reporting what happened, and I've not seen the guy or been followed since then. I'm hoping I never have to see him again. Reading some of these, I thought I'd add a very recent experience of my own. Myself, 35, and my children, male 14, female 11, and female 5, were returning to my car after a very successful cinema trip. We were all in very high spirits. The older two were on either side of me, and the 5-year-old was holding my hand. It was a relatively late showing, so we got to the car park around 19:30, not too late in the UK at the height of summer. It was a boiling hot day too, important to remember. It was a typical multi-story car park in the city center of a smallish city. It was a relatively open space with decent lighting. Only 2 exits on that side though, the one we walked through. We were about 50 spaces up, so quite a ways away. Anyway, as we entered, I immediately felt eyes on me. You know, that uncomfortable feeling of being watched, without knowing where it's coming from. I did a quick recon and saw a man dressed head to toe in very heavy clothing, trousers with a beanie hat covering his face, walking directly toward me with very strong eye contact. The car park did have a fair few homeless people hanging out in it, because it was cooler and sheltered. The guy being in full cold weather gear, I assumed to be homeless. With the speed and direction he was walking, there was literally no other way to go than out of the car park and over the bridge toward the town center. As we proceeded to our car, though, I noticed immediately that the man had not gone out of the car park, but instead took a sudden sharp right turn and was now walking parallel to us. His speed had changed to match the slower pace being set by my smallest child. He had his body angled away from me, but his eyes were clearly observing us. His head was angled just enough toward us that I could see his left eye looking. My inner warning system was going mental at this point. I immediately told my kids to stay close to me. By this time, my son had also clocked the guy as weird and was giving me a look that was asking me if I was seeing this too. We still had a bit of a ways to go, and annoyingly, I had used my husband's car. On top of being a pain in the arse for car seat access, it also makes a really obnoxious beeping sound when you unlock it. It was parked alone in the last row. Further past that was a ramp to another level. The car we had driven wasn't at all a family-style vehicle, and there just so happened to be a minivan parked right next to us. I guess that was to our fortune, because I could tell the man had assumed that vehicle was mine. That's where he was heading, as he was going to approach from the back. I kept my eyes on the man. I told the older two that as soon as we got to the car to get in quickly and shut the doors. No panicking. At this point, my middle child had also clocked the man as suspicious and kept looking to me for reassurance. I couldn't stress this enough. This guy looked like a predator circling his prey. With the way the car park was set up, unless he was parked there, there was absolutely no reason for anybody to be walking the direction he was. The only thing his path led him to was literally straight towards empty car parking spaces and a dead-end wall. As we approached the vehicle, the man was slightly ahead of us. I unlocked the stupid beeping car, and he made full eye contact with me. As soon as he made it around the bend, he started a beeline right for us. I got the kids in as quickly as they could, doing a fantastic job of following what I'd said. Within just 5 seconds, we were all in. The doors were closed and locked as well. If I had taken any longer, the man would have pounced right at us. As soon as the man heard the door lock click, he immediately took a sharp left and started running away from the car in the direction he'd originally come from. As we started to pull away, he stopped what he was doing and watched us the entire time. He turned again and went back to the exit I'd first passed him at. Obviously, this prompted a bit of a talk with the kids about safety, opportunism, and trusting your gut, along with how proud I was of them for listening and following my orders. It was probably nothing more than a nefarious man seeing a small woman outnumbered by kids as an easy target for a mugging or robbery, and that it was luckily really badly executed. I have to point out as well that this isn't the first time I've been approached in a similar manner in that almost empty car park. For anyone who's like, you're just paranoid. I've had people try to even open my passenger door in broad daylight while I was reading a book in my car, waiting for someone, of course. This man had just moved across the entire car park straight at me. I'm going to tell you a story that still makes me angry to this day, even though it happened back when I was just a kid. This was when I was about 12 years old or so. I went to the local school and was a very shy kid, but I did have several friends. I remember there was this one kid at my school named Eric. We had some mutual friends and certainly knew who each other were, but I wouldn't say that we were best of friends or anything. We never really even hung out at all. I didn't know a whole lot about Eric even. But we did have a class together and sat sort of near each other, so I would often hear him talking to other people. When I was talking with my friends, he would sometimes stop by and chat with our group. I remember one of my friends said that he got invited to Eric's birthday party that weekend, and to my surprise, the next day Eric invited me as well. He told me the address and the time and said to bring a present for him. He wrote the information down on a post-it note. I remember that. Then he handed it over to me. I felt really good for being invited to his party. As a shy kid, I did not get invited to a whole lot of birthday parties, let's say. Eric was not really known as that cool or popular, but he certainly had a lot more friends than I did, and I thought fairly well of him. I hadn't known that he even considered me to be a good enough friend to invite to his party. When Friday came, Eric's party was that night. I had gone out with my mom the previous day and gotten Eric a good present. During the school day, the one of my friends who was also invited told me that he wasn't going. I guess he had to go to his sister's recital or something. Anyway, that made me a lot more nervous to go to the party, because I would no longer really know anybody else there that well. That night, my mom drove me to Eric's house. It was supposed to be a sleepover, and she said she would pick me up the next morning. I was dropped off right on time and walked up to the house. I knocked on the door, and after a moment or two, Eric himself opened it. There was another kid with him that I didn't recognize. He invited me inside. I heard some other kids in another room, which sounded like it was at the other end of the house. Eric told me to follow him and led me to the kitchen, which was at the back side of the home. Another kid I didn't know then walked over from someplace else. Now it was just me, Eric, and two other kids. Everyone else was still in some other room. There was a kitchen table with a bunch of presents on it, and Eric told me I could leave my present there. I did, and he told me to follow him. I thought he was going back to where everyone else was, but instead he led me to the back door that was also in the kitchen. This led to the backyard. He told me to go outside. I didn't know why, but I did so. As soon as I was out the door, he slammed the door shut behind me and started laughing. His friends started laughing too. I thought that he was joking at first. I went back to the door and expected him to let me back inside, but I heard him locking it. He then said something like, "Later, loser," and covered the window to the door and walked away. At first, I didn't know if it was still a joke or what, but after standing outside for 5 minutes, I realized it was no joke at all, and he was not coming back. I felt really bad. I was too embarrassed to go knock on a door and try to get back inside. I didn't even really want to anyway. I just wanted to go home. I didn't have a cell phone back then, and my mom wouldn't think to go back until the next morning. I was trying to figure out what to do. I ended up moving back into the street and walked a ways down. Eventually, I had to knock on the door of a random person's home. Luckily, they answered. I asked to use a phone to call my parents, and I was able to. My mom then came to pick me up. When we got home, she was able to find out the number of Eric's mom. She called her, and I remember Eric's mom claimed she had no idea I was even invited. She drove Eric to our house later the next day and made him apologize to me in person, as well as giving the present back. I didn't really feel much better, though. I had been humiliated. After that, I never talked to Eric again. I saw him around school the next year or two, but luckily we did not end up going to the same high school. This happened 20 years ago. My name is Liz, and when I was turning 14 years old, I had a birthday party with some friends of mine. It was not a huge party, mind you. It was just me and my 4 closest friends from school. The 5 of us went to my house after school on Friday, and we're going to have a sleepover. We got pizza and just hung out and had a good time. We stayed up late in my room playing video games and doing that sort of thing. Finally, when it was pretty late, we got tired and were going to go to sleep. We were all sleeping in my bedroom because it was pretty large and nice. I was in my bed and all my friends had sleeping bags and plenty of space. I remember that it was probably around 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm not sure if any of us were asleep yet. I know that I wasn't, certainly. I was laying in bed with my eyes closed, trying to get to sleep, when next thing I knew, I heard a sudden knock at my bedroom window from outside. There was absolutely no mistaking it. There were several somewhat loud knocks at the window. I sat up in bed and looked over to it. There were shades mostly covering it, so I couldn't really see anything. I whispered to the rest of the room, asking if everyone else had heard that. Several of my friends chimed in, saying they had. The knocking had stopped, so I decided to get up and look out the window and see what was going on. I walked over to it and lifted up the shades. When I did, I saw this random man standing there. I instantly backed away from the window and told everybody a man was outside. A few of my friends had also briefly seen him as well. We all ran out of the room and headed toward the living room. By then, everybody else in the house was asleep. I remember that we looked out the living room window outside, but didn't see the man anymore. We talked amongst ourselves and went around checking several different windows. After not seeing or hearing anything unusual or strange, we decided to go back into my bedroom. We figured that whoever it was must have left and would not be coming back. We were going to attempt to go to sleep again. Before doing so, though, I checked out of my bedroom window one last time. When I did, I saw the man coming out from behind a tree in the front yard. He instantly began walking in my direction. I moved away from the window, and we all left the room again, except this time we called the police. We waited away from windows and toward the center of the house for them to come. I also woke everyone else up as well. When the police got there, the man was already gone and nowhere to be seen. Luckily, after that, he did not return. That remains one of the scariest moments of my life. When I was in high school and I first began driving, I began doing deliveries for my father's business. We lived in town, and most of the deliveries would be in town as well. However, there were definitely some orders that required me to drive out into the more rural areas around there. This was around 40 years ago, so it was long before people were ordering things online every day. In order to get some things, my dad would have to order them for his customers and then have them either picked up or delivered. They were mostly mechanical parts and computer parts, which were a little bit more difficult to get back then than they are now. Around the time that I had been doing this for just over a year, I began having some issues with a group of guys in school. They would give me a hard time because I had my dad's car to drive around in and would never give them rides in it. My dad had forbidden that, and he was the kind of guy who would be quite scary when he was pissed off about something. Because I denied them, though, they started being real jerks to me, especially after they'd asked multiple times and I had to turn them down each one. I started looking forward to working more often in my free time. I wasn't dating much or at all, so I really enjoyed the time I had to myself driving. One of the strangest orders was for a computer part. I had gotten it with a phone number and no address on it. I had to call and ask for the delivery address when the part came in. It turned out this guy lived really far out in the hills and had to give me some very elaborate directions to get to his place. I was surprised by just how far out it was. It was a bit late once it arrived, and it was so far out. It was getting dark, so I offered to bring the part by the next day instead. He offered me a really good tip to get it to him that night, something I just couldn't turn down. It was already getting dark as I was heading out, and I wasn't used to driving at nighttime. I also didn't drive out into these hills very often, so this was a very new experience for me. I didn't like driving at night around here. It was so hard to see where you were going. I would occasionally fear things jumping out of the dark at me. I was pretty worried about getting lost out there. The roads were very thin and easy to lose track of. I was surprised by the time I got to the house. I got out with a flashlight and made sure the letters on the old mailbox were the correct ones. There were no lights on at the house inside or out, and the place looked like it was abandoned. I was worried I had somehow gotten it wrong, but the numbers I'd been given were correct. If there had been a driveway leading up to this house, it had long since grown over. Rather than drive right up to it, I had to walk a fair distance. I grabbed the part and the flashlight and began to walk up to this dark and scary home. I was walking slowly up to the house. Part of this was because it was so dark and hard to see, but also because I wanted to put it off as long as possible. A large part of me wanted to just leave the part in the yard and not walk up at all. Of course, then I wouldn't get the tip the guy had promised me. That was the only thing that kept me moving forward. About halfway up the front yard, I did notice a light turn on in the home. At first, I felt some sense of relief, but that went away when the front door opened, and a dark figure emerged onto the porch. I could only see the figure because of the light on behind him, clearly holding some sort of rifle in his hands. I didn't feel very welcome. For a few moments, neither of us moved. I took another step forward, but no sooner than that, I noticed him pointing the rifle right at me. I strongly suspected this was not the same person I had talked to on the phone just shortly before. I didn't know how to react. The only thing I wanted to do was run back to the car. I was on shaky legs, however, and felt unable to do that. It didn't take but a moment for the man to begin yelling gibberish at me. I really didn't understand anything he was saying. It was all just jumbled and scary sounding. At that point, I dropped the part on the ground and just ran back to the car as quickly as I could. I kept expecting to get shot in the back on the way out. Fortunately, no shots came. I got back to the car. The man had walked off his porch and out into the yard, but it didn't seem he was pursuing me really. I was able to drive off and out of there. I was still shaken pretty badly. The whole ride until I got home was terrifying. When I did arrive, I explained everything to my dad about what happened. I'm not sure how much he believed me at first, but he accepted that I was telling the truth eventually. There is a little more to the end of this story. I found out much later what might have happened in this case. A former friend of mine, one who had gotten pissed at one of the other guys who were bullying me, told me that it was a setup to get me shot. They had ordered the computer part and given me the wrong address to deliver it to. The owner of the house was one of these guys' great uncles or something, and he hated whenever anyone came onto his property. The bullies knew that at the very least the old man would scare me, but also he would likely shoot at me. I never confronted them on it. I knew the guy who told me would deny it if I told them that he'd said it, so I never found out if that's really what happened. However, it did make a lot of sense. This happened to me when I was going on a hike a few days through a park. I don't want to say where it happened exactly, because I'm still not really sure what exactly happened, and I don't want to speak badly about a place if I can't know exactly what was going on there. I went hiking all on my own. It was a specific hiking trail, and it was not unusual to run into other hikers all the time. I was doing this during a time when I had some time off. I had deliberately picked this time because I was less likely to run into others. I like sticking to the official trails because they were safer, and I was less likely to get lost, so I tended to do all my hiking when others wouldn't be. I must have really picked a good hiking time this time, because I wasn't encountering a single other person at all. Starting that first evening out there, though, I began experiencing things that made me feel like I wasn't alone. The first was sounds of other people walking. The first few times I heard it, when I looked around or waited to give the person time to catch up to me, I never did see anybody. What's more, the sounds would stop shortly after I quit walking. I wasn't too scared at first, though. It was just kind of strange, really. There were no more noises or anything at night on that first night. Although I couldn't explain it, I no longer had the feeling of being watched or not being alone. By that point, I decided it was all in my imagination. I was in my tent and had a peaceful sleep that first night out. Those feelings didn't last too long, however. The following day, things started out much the same, but it got even stranger. A few times I could have sworn I saw someone when I heard the noises stop, but whoever it may have been, they tried to stay far out of the range of my sight. I could barely tell if I was actually seeing someone there, or if it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. It was very disconcerting, and it really just amplified the feeling of being watched and the fear that came from it. Things got a little weirder that night. At first, I thought it may have just been me being worked up from the whole day. Fear has a tendency to do that. You can work yourself up over time and your mind can begin playing tricks on you. That unpleasant feeling of being watched only got worse as it got darker outside, and even worse at night while I was trying to go to sleep. Things didn't get better the next day either. Although I was able to get some sleep, I didn't end up sleeping very well. I wasn't feeling great and felt myself becoming a lot more paranoid. Once again, I thought I was catching a glimpse of something keeping out of my field of view. Almost like someone knew I was having a difficult time believing I was alone in the woods and was preying upon those thoughts. The third evening was when I really began to get a little worried. I actually heard something that I couldn't just describe away. While I was trying to get rest in my tent this night, I heard what was undeniably another human being whistling outside in the dark. What made it worse was that it would occasionally stop, and then when it started back up again, it would be from a different portion of the woods than it had been before. It truly convinced me that there was someone else out there, and for some reason, this person was messing with me. These sorts of things continued into the next day. It was from the way they continued that kept freaking me out about what had been going on. If I had run into some other hikers, I may have felt better about it. It was overwhelming, though, being alone in those woods with someone clearly tailing and messing with me. By the time I was heading back to my car, I came upon a pretty narrow portion of the trail. There were branches that had been reaching across, and it had almost grown over. When I'd first seen it, it didn't seem like a safe place to move through, but I knew I had to do it. No sooner than I came upon this area, I saw the figure once again, this time up ahead of me. He was standing beyond the area I had to walk through and very quickly ducked out of my sight. I froze and didn't want to move forward. I knew I had to, though, in order to get out of these woods and back to my car. I slowly began making my way forward, worried the entire time. I can't even tell you what was going through my mind as I got there. As I squeezed through the end of that area, I noticed something on the ground that terrified me. There was blood splattered all over, and what looked to be some sort of mangled up small animal. I don't know what it was, though, because it had been so torn to shreds. I knew it had been left there to either scare or warn me. Either way, I wanted nothing to do with this. I think a lot of people may have run the rest of the way out, but I didn't want to do that. That would have made me more scared if I had begun running. I always had this thought that if something really was after me, running would only cause it to run after me faster. It was quite an unnerving and long walk through the rest of the wooded area until I got back to my car. As I did get back and began to drive off, I looked back at the area I'd come from. Once again, I noticed a black figure standing in the woods. When I got back to the cabin that you had to register in before going into the hiking area, I made sure to make a report of what I had seen. I let them know what I had seen and how the other hiker had been behaving, but for the time, I was the only hiker that had been registered to be on that trail. Whoever had been out there must have been out there without permission. I live in a quiet neighborhood out in the suburbs. I enjoy going on walks around the neighborhood because there's a nice park area that goes in circles around a small pond. There's a playground there as well. Most evenings, I would take a short walk through the neighborhood and around the pond. I would get my exercise in for the day, and it was very relaxing to be out there in nature. One Saturday during the summer, I couldn't take my walk until later in the day because it had been raining all day. The rain finally stopped sometime close to 10 p.m., and even though I don't usually take these walks in the dark, I thought it would be nice to get out of the house after being inside all day long. I began taking my normal route through the neighborhood and toward the playground, which would lead into the path and walk around the pond. As I approached the playground area, though, I noticed there was a figure sitting there on the bench, dressed in all dark clothing. It was odd to see somebody out in the playground on this rainy night, but I thought it could be somebody like me, getting out of the home for a bit. As I continued and began to enter the path that would lead around the pond, I was surprised to see the person from the playground had gotten up and was now heading my way. It appeared they were going to take the same path around the pond that I was taking right behind me. I immediately felt uneasy, especially since this person was moving pretty quickly. I was nervous because the walk around the pond area was very dark. There were no lights in that area at all. I was extremely nervous about having this person behind me in the dark. As soon as I entered the darkness of that path, I began to run. Not a full sprint, mind you, but a speed considerably quicker than a jog. My fears reached a new level. When about halfway around the pond in the distance behind me, I heard footsteps pounding on the pavement. The person who'd followed me onto that path had also begun to run, and it sounded like they were gaining on me. With less than half of the walk left, I increased my run to a full-on sprint, so I could at least get back to the lighted area on the sidewalk by the main road. I managed to make it out of the wooded path before whoever was running behind me could catch up to me. I ran down the main street a bit back toward my house and kept looking back to see if someone would exit the path. Nobody emerged from that area. It appeared they had stopped and were staying in the dark area. I didn't see anybody for the rest of my walk home, but just in case, I took a different way back than I normally do. It involved many more turns through the neighborhood. It seems that whoever had been chasing me wanted to catch me on that stretch of path around the pond where it was completely dark and wooded. I'm glad I trusted my instincts and began running as soon as I entered that wooded area. Otherwise, the person may have caught up with me. That was the last walk I ever took after dark around my neighborhood, and I was still skeptical taking that path around the pond even during the day. I'm currently a high school gym teacher. This is something that happened just last school year. One day, I was preparing for a class that I was about to teach. In the class, we were going to be using the high school gymnasium and doing some activities. For these activities, I needed to get some equipment, such as orange cones and whatnot. The school is kind of old, though, and the storage room for all that stuff is, for some reason, really far away from the gym. You had to walk down this really long hallway nearby. There were a few storage rooms toward the end of it. On this day, I left the gym and started walking down this long hallway to the storage room. When I opened up the door, it was mostly dark inside. Now, these storage rooms are very cluttered. Things are not organized at all. There are several shelves with random things on them, and various other things strewn all about. After getting inside, it was very dark. I didn't bother to turn on the light, though, because I knew exactly what I needed and where it was supposed to be. After taking a couple of steps inside, suddenly I heard a noise. Next thing I knew, one of the equipment shelves was falling over right on top of me. After landing on me, basically everything fell off the shelf on top of me as well. I wasn't badly hurt, but I had been knocked down and was now covered in random things. It all happened so quickly, but I knew that somebody was in here and had pushed over that shelf on purpose. It was not the sort of thing that would just suddenly fall over on its own. I pushed the junk off of me and looked around. I heard somebody moving around there, but I couldn't see who it was. I got up to my feet and was about to back out of the room into the hallway. That was when I heard another voice. I turned and just barely saw what looked to be a random man. He ducked out of view quickly and started to push over another shelf at me. I was able to get out of the room just before it came crashing down. As I left, I heard the guy coming to leave the room as well. As I was walking away, I saw the door open and saw the man emerge from the room. I knew this guy didn't work for the school, and this was obviously no student at all. I sprinted down the hall and ran back into the gym. When I got there, I took out my phone and reported the incident to the police. The school was put into lockdown. For the lockdown, I went into an otherwise vacant classroom that was really close to the gym. This classroom was not being used and did not belong to any teacher in particular. When I went inside, I was all by myself. I locked the door. As I was inside, maybe 5 minutes later, there was a sudden banging on the outside. I had a bad feeling about this. I walked over and tried to peek and see who was out there. I saw the same man from before. As soon as he saw me, he tried to open the locked door. He began to pound on it and acted like he was trying to break the door open. Luckily, the school's doors were very strong. I went back over to my desk and reported the guy's location. I hoped that would get him to leave me alone and that he would be caught soon. He continued to attack the door for a good 5 minutes. When the police arrived, they were able to get the man and leave the school with him. I'm not sure how he even got in the first place. Maybe he had been hiding in that storage room for a while, possibly as long as a day. I still can't believe he pushed the shelf over onto me. If he hadn't done that, I might have never known he was there. I'm glad that I and everyone else in the school was okay. Every time I go to those storage rooms now, though, I still get worried that some random person will just be hiding in there. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.